Hello, everybody, and welcome, welcome, welcome. I am Suzanna Walters, the director of the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies program at Northeastern University, and I want to welcome you to #Feminism, Gender, and the 2020 election. First, a warm thank you to all of our co-sponsors, and especially to our fabulous WGSS program coordinator, Kiki Samko, for making this all happen. A few bits of business here. This keynote is the first event of the day. We have two other panels today. The first, Making Feminisms, Organizing Resistance Online and in Real Life, begins at 1. And the second, Still We Persist, Organizing Resistance in the Streets and on the Hill, begins at 3. You do need to register for these panels, so check out the registration link that's in the chat. I want to remind you that we are recording and the footage may be used for external purposes. After all the talks today, there will be a moderated Q&A. Check out the chat for instructions on asking questions. And remember that all questions should be typed into the Q&A box, not in the chat box. If you'd like to use closed captioning for the event, you can do so by clicking the closed captioning button. Now, given our topic and given the moment, just a few days before a hotly contested election, and we're all sick to our stomachs. We were just talking about it a few minutes ago. An election in which the very future of American democracy is on the ballot, not to get you all nervous, but we thought we'd begin with a brief video that I found enormously uplifting and inspiring, something we need in these trying times. This video is produced and arranged by the Voorhees Choir at Rutgers University, an ensemble that champions text and music composed by women. This song, What Happens When a Woman, is by Alexandra Olsovsky, and it was produced to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment and to honor the late, great Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So enjoy.
What happens when a woman takes power? What happens when she won't back down? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens? What happens? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens when she won't back down? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens? What happens? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens when she won't back down? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens when she wears the crown? What happens when she rules her own body? What happens when she sets the beat? What happens when she bows to nobody? What happens when she stands on her own 2 feet? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens when she won't back down? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens? What happens? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens when she won't back down? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens when she wears the crown? Whoa, we rise above, whoa, we lead with love, whoa, we have won, we are one, we've just begun, whoa, we rise above, whoa, we lead with love, whoa, we have won, we are one, we've just begun. We've just begun. Takes power. What happens when she won't back down? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens? but she wears the crown, 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 crown.
That video always makes this old feminist cry, but I hope you all enjoyed this. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. So Zerlina Maxwell does it all. She's a political analyst, a commentator, a speaker, a lawyer, a writer for a variety of national media outlets. Her work is focused on national politics, on candidates, and specific policy and culture issues, including race, feminism, domestic violence, sexual assault, victim blaming, and gender inequality. She is an author. Her wonderful book, The End of White Politics, which I just finished, and it's fabulous, was just released and she now has her own hour-long show, Zerlina, on the Peacock Network, which premiered just a few days ago. But there's more. She is currently the director of progressive programming at SiriusXM, where she hosts a weekly radio show, Signal Boost, and a political analyst for MSNBC. She also appears regularly on numerous other networks and has written for publications such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, Jet, American Prospect, Huffington Post, Salon.com, the list goes on. In the not so distant past, although it seems for many of us like a lifetime ago, she worked as a field organizer for the 2008 Obama presidential campaign and was director of progressive media for Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. She also acted as a campaign spokesperson for the presidential debates. Now, that's just the tip of the very impressive Maxwell iceberg. I should add, and I'm sure many of you know this already, Ms. Maxwell has a serious Twitter game going on. Indeed, she was profiled in the New York Times as a top political Twitter voice to follow and was selected by Time magazine as having one of the best Twitter feeds. Now, I know we are all excited in these anxious times to hear her words of wisdom. Tough times call for more feminism, more anti-racism, and more resistance. Friends and colleagues, here to offer some thoughts on all of this, Zerlina Maxwell.
I am so excited to be here in what feels like a surreal moment. And I'm just so happy that those of you who could have been doing so many other things on a Friday chose to participate in what I think is an important moment for people who identify as feminists, for people who are looking at the world around them and just upset often by the things that we're seeing other people experience, and that we know can be different, because if you are able to reimagine something, you can go make that thing the thing that you've created in your imagination. And it's so ironic that the song that was just played, and I went to Rutgers Law School, so shout out to New Jersey, because that's where I'm from. The song that was just played, what happens when a woman has power, I literally at the top of my talk here have the question, what's it going to take to elect a woman as president in America? And so it just feels like that's where everybody's head is at in this moment, as we're just a couple of days away from the most important and consequential election in American history. And I know they say that every time, but this time, all the political people really mean it. I want to start off by acknowledging what I think is probably something people are experiencing as they're listening to me right now, which is that they are anxious. They are anxious, they are stressed out. If you are sleeping well, please tell me your secrets. I've been struggling all pandemic to fall asleep, to stay asleep, to not toss and turn, because there's so much on the line. And I felt like Donald Trump was an existential threat to our health and well-being before the pandemic. So imagine, how I feel today. And so I feel like, the entirety of the Trump administration for me, and, the title of this presentation, my cat likes to come to almost all of my meetings. So he will attend. Say hi, Michael, to the group, feminist. He likes to attend. He sits right in camera shots on purpose. He knows where the camera is. welcome to your cat. We welcome your cat. Okay, great. This first feminist conference. And, I feel like that anxiety that we're all feeling in this moment is because it's so uncertain. And the pandemic, even before the pandemic, it was very uncertain. And Donald Trump obviously does not abide by any norms or laws that we can at least, hold stock in that, well, he can't do that because there's a law about it. Just stop saying he can't do said thing, because basically all the list of things that we've said he cannot do, he has done them in the past tense. So he did them past tense. It may have been illegal, and certainly those folks who are in his administration who have suffered the consequences of that understand that. But I just want to give you all what I feel like is a helpful anecdote, a weekend out from Election Day. Again, Election Day really is the last day to vote. If you think of it that way, it's the deadline for voting. Early voting is your period and season to be able to vote. And then I hope everybody in the audience did vote here. If you did not, and you need a plan, you can go to iwillvote.com or vote.org, as you saw in the video, and make a plan. But even more importantly, I think I'm going to tell you a story about how I ended up on the Obama campaign in 2008. And someone I met even before I went to Virginia to work for Obama. And I hope that helps cure some of your anxiety and maybe even channels, I don't know, your inner organizer. Because before I joined the campaign in Virginia, I was still in New Jersey. That's where I grew up. And I signed up to go to like the local town fair and register voters. Basically, I wanted to work on the Obama campaign because I lived through the George W. Bush administration and the 2 terms of that administration, and the war on terror and the wars and all of that, Hurricane Katrina. And I basically said to myself, well, if I don't go and help in the campaign and like actively channel my anxiety and frustration and stress, and I channel it into something good, if I channel it into helping, elect someone different, then I don't have the right to complain, right? I almost said like, well, I'm gonna go do this so that if George, or not George Bush, if a Republican is elected in the year 2008, then I can complain. So I basically joined the campaign just so that I could have permission to complain, which, you can tell I've evolved since then. But when I first got to that first event, there was a young woman in charge. She was 17 years old, and she had been doing it the past couple of weekends. So she was pretty much in charge, because once you've been there once, you know the rules. So then you get to tell everybody else what the deal is. So she's signing everyone in. And I remember asking her like, oh, you're only 17. Like, when's your birthday? And she was like, it's after Election Day. So she's not even going to be 18 in time to vote. And so I, older person, maybe I think I was 25 at the time, older person, earnestly asked, like completely unaware that obviously people who aren't old enough to vote, or who are unable to vote for whatever reason, they live here. So basically I asked her very earnestly, like, well, why are you here? Because you can't even vote. I don't even understand why you would even want to help or be here doing this. And she looked at me and she was like, well, I have to live in the country with the president being in charge of the country. And I want to make sure that the president that's in charge is one that isn't going to put me and my family in danger, is one that's going to get health care. I remember that was one of her main issues. And so I felt, as the 25-year-old person, really stupid, because the 17-year-old high school student basically read me for filth and was like, don't you get that I have to live in the country. And it actually does suck that I do not get to weigh in. But she said the most important thing after that. She said, even if I could vote, that's one vote. But me standing here today outside of this state fair with this clipboard, registering 100, 200, 300 people to vote, means that I have just factored in 300 votes, potentially, for the candidate that I support, right? So I tell that story to say, the reason I joined the Obama campaign in 2008 was so that I would be able to complain. But I also feel like it was a healthy and effective way for me to channel that anxiety. So if any of you in the audience today are feeling, that kind of nauseous feeling, or that kind of, that knot in the bottom of your stomach because you just don't know what's going to happen on Tuesday. One, we should understand that we may not know on Tuesday night, and not knowing on Tuesday night is not an indication as to whether something is wrong or it won't end up the way that you at home, want it to end up. But the bottom line is this: there are still a couple of days before election day. And again, election day is the last day to vote. So if you have not, make your plan. If you have, find 10 people and make sure they voted. How many cousins do you have? How many roommates do you have? And then you can start texting out the vote or phone banking from your cell phone and calling voters in North Carolina or Florida, which is essentially the one that, if it's called for the Democrats this year, it's going to be a very difficult path. So that was all a setup to emphasize that I strongly believe that the best way to de-stress in politically uncertain times is to get involved. And one of the things I think my career demonstrates is that there are many ways to get involved in politics, whether it be on the media side, whether it be in the campaign. And think of campaigns as a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary activity. If you build websites, you can go on a campaign. If you make graphics, paint, draw, dance, sing songs, if you write, if you you're just really enthusiastic, or you sew and you make really cool masks, for example, there is a place for you in a campaign. So that was all a setup. Just I know people in the audience are anxious because I am anxious, and everyone I speak to is telling me they're also anxious about this. So channel that into productive engagement in our democracy. There are still a couple of days left. So, okay, The Reckoning. I titled this talk The Reckoning well before Donald Trump really was even in existence. I've been doing gender talks for a decade, and I've always looked at the work that I'm doing as trying bit by bit to move the culture, to push the culture, to get people to see things differently, to talk about things differently. And I've seen that happen. It's quite unbelievable to actually see that happen. So where I want to start is essentially talking about, the talk that I used to give and then updated for this present moment, because I'm not going to give the talk that I used to give because I think it's actually outdated for this moment, which is actually my goal. My intention in those rape culture talks was to push the conversation far enough that I needed to give a new talk. And so that's what I'm going to do today. So basically, in those talks, I would talk about how rape culture is a spectrum, right? It normalizes sexual assault, and it goes from everything from something benign like a joke all the way to this more severe end of the spectrum and actual physical violence. And we needed to understand that all of these things are happening at the same time, that catcalling and street harassment is happening at the same time that actual sexual assault is happening. But there's something that happened between the time I used to do this talk all the time and Donald Trump becoming the president. I worked for Hillary Clinton. And so one of the things that I learned working for a woman candidate is that I actually think we do need to change some of the cultural stuff and continue that work in order to provide the correct pathway for women to achieve positions of power. So when I started the talk, it's what's it going to take for us to elect a woman president? And I think the beginning of the answer to that is we need to normalize the idea of women being in positions of power and authority, and women being in positions where they command respect, attention, and I don't know. I think this is a moment where we're seeing a shift on that, because right after Donald Trump was elected, we had the largest protest in American history. And so one of the things I think that's happening in this moment, the reckoning around Donald Trump and why we've sort of shifted beyond, I think, the basic tenets of this talk to a new and I think more exciting area, is that there are so many people on board. When I talk to a group like this, and I use a term like rape culture, you know what I'm talking about. You know exactly what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. You know how it shows up in the world. You know how to call it out when you see it. You know how to push back against it when it's in the media. And I think that is a sign of progress. So what do we do with that progress? What I think we do with that progress is we all use our unique tools and skills and target it at something. Pick a problem. Target your skill set towards said problem. And try to emphasize the fact that this is ours, right? I feel like, you know, the idea that a country that has a majority population of women, you know, that calls itself, you know, the land of the free, should be a little bit more embarrassed about the fact that in over 200 years, we have not elected a woman as vice president or president. And one of the things I was thinking about last night, that's frustrating me this week a little bit, is that it's Friday, and on Tuesday night, potentially, America could elect the first woman vice president we've ever elected. And yet that is not the top story on every channel. That's not the top story on every channel. And I want you to think about maybe why that is. Is that because that's not a big deal? Of course it's a big deal. Is that because the people who are on TV, even if they're men, they don't care? No, they probably care. You know, a lot of them have daughters, and they, you know, some of them do care about obviously making gender progress in terms of how women are seen and how they try to maintain positions of power. But I think that one of the things that is interesting about this moment, and I felt this way in 2016 as well, was that because the media is so male dominated, and you know who sets what editorial agenda is happening in the mainstream space, basically they're missing the biggest story right now. The biggest story right now is America might elect a woman on Tuesday. That seems like a big moment that is worthy of discussion and celebration. And in many ways, it's one of the reasons why I feel like, you know, the reckoning that, you know, I have always, you know, wanted to occur. And I feel like the Me Too movement started by the great Tarana Burke, and all the progress we've made since 2017 through this horrific Trump era. You know, I've always wanted to say, you know, look at how much progress we made. These are our new issues. Let's try to work on those. I still always have to go back to the fact that, like, even when we are making the progress, we're not even allowed to celebrate it. We're not even allowed to step back and be like, look at what we have just done. We have actually made so much progress. I mean, I interviewed Hillary Clinton the other day, and one of the things that I was thinking about as we were talking is, like, you know, when you blaze the trail, you actually have to go through the fire yourself. And so if Hillary Clinton is that first woman to run for president, and she blazes the trail for the next woman, for the Kamala, for Elizabeth Warren, for Kirsten Gillibrand, for all those other women to stand up and say, I should be in charge, she's gonna get hurt. She got a little hurt, right? There was damage done. But because she blazed that trail for us, it's going to be easier for the next woman. So the question of the talk is, what's it gonna take to elect a woman president? Well, I don't know the answer to that question. But I do know that we're a few days away from maybe electing a woman vice president. And that is a significant sign of progress, particularly because that vice president is a woman of color, a Black and South Asian woman. That is a big deal. It's a big deal. So I don't want us to overlook that. And you read the newspaper, you don't see it. Just remember I said that. It's interesting that it's not, holy crap, we're about to elect a woman on every single news channel, but we are. So that brings me to a place where that brings us to where we are. But I want to talk a little bit about the future as well. So everybody, I believe, in attendance will have the opportunity, I hope, to read my book, The End of White Politics. And part of the motivation for me wanting to write this book in addition to, all of the work I had done previously around the issue of rape culture and feminism, was that I essentially had a unique lens to talk about politics because I'm coming at it from an intersectional perspective. And so I think what makes my book and analysis unique from some of the other things that are talking about this moment is that it's a statement of aspiration, the end of white politics. I'm looking forward. It is not the current. In some places it kind of is, in Texas and California, and in some places, the demographics have already shifted. But overall, it's not a right now thing, but it could be a very soon thing if we all understood our own power, right? So when I set out to write this book, it really was because of my own experiences dealing with sexism on the left and racism on the left. And if that sentence sounds weird to you, just know that being on the left doesn't mean that you don't have blind spots, that you don't have privileges, that you don't have things that you could work on, because we all do. Even I do, right? We all have things. And so when I went to a conference, it was called Politicon, after the election, and I was on a panel of Democratic operatives and media folks, and we were basically put on stage to yell at each other and blame the different parts of the Democratic Party for Hillary Clinton's Electoral College defeat in 2016. And one of the panelists next to me was a very strong Bernie Sanders supporter, and I worked for Hillary Clinton. So because I worked for Hillary Clinton, that I feel like people assume I don't like Bernie Sanders, but no one ever asked me, right? So I think that's also interesting. No one really ever asked me. I have been critical of Bernie Sanders, but again, being critical of a politician doesn't mean you don't like them. No one ever asked me. So always make sure before you assume, oh, you just hate someone, that's why you're criticizing them. No, constructive criticism is helpful. So I'm at Politicon and I'm having a conversation. We're all sort of like riffing on, what could have gone differently, what went wrong. And I remember trying to make the point in a hostile room, frankly, that one of the things that Bernie Sanders could do better in 2020 if he were to run again, because this is in 2018 when we're having this conference. And so if he wants to run again, these are a couple of things that he could do better, right? Basically, I feel like his main flaw in 2016 was his inability to speak to racial justice issues through an intersectional lens, as opposed to only talking about class and economics and Wall Street, and leaving out race and gender as important factors when you're talking about issues and when you're considering policy solutions to those problems more specifically. And I started getting booed. I mean, loudly. Booed, hissed, jarred. I'm thinking people call me a shill. I was like, I have student loans. There is no shilling out. There's just like, I don't understand what economics says you think I'm at. I am at my parents' house quarantined. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we're not talking about, somebody who has millions and millions of dollars. We all want to aspire to that and we work hard, but like, let's be real. Like, I think you have misunderstood who I am, because I'm a Black woman in America, and I just need you to understand that does not come along with some fancy privileges like that you think I am. And so when I just tried to make the very simple point that, one of the things that Bernie Sanders specifically, but really progressives need to do better, is to speak in the language of intersectionality and try to speak directly to racial justice, directly to gender equity, so that we're not missing things. We're not missing things. That was it. It wasn't an indictment. It's simply, oh, here's something that you could do better because I think that you missed this point. It's an important one. And you shouldn't be defensive about missing it because it's not your experience. Sometimes you miss stuff. That's not your experience. And in sort of the midst of all of the booing and all of that, an editor walked up to me from my now publisher, Hachette, and was like, okay, this is I had talked to her about writing another book, which ironically was going to be titled The Reckoning, because that was going to be about rape culture and sexual assault and trying to, really just, acculturate young people, but certainly parents of younger children so that they could, just create a different world, right? But she said, no, this is the book. This what you're saying right here is the book. And I think her point in that moment was the fact that, in order to evolve, in order to push past this moment, in order to move forward, you have to acknowledge where you messed up. And one of the places we mess up often is that we fail to acknowledge when something is not our own experience, and that because we have a blind spot for that thing, we may not have the right position on a policy or, maybe a news story. Certainly the presence of video now, for example, just to use a recent example, the presence of video now allows more white Americans to understand that the police are killing Black people who sometimes are just sleeping, and then they go home. So I always try to explain that as two steps. It's not, they didn't just kill the Black person. It's that the society that we live in also said it was okay to kill the Black person because there are no societal consequences for that conduct, right? It's just a blind spot. It doesn't mean that, you're a bad person because you didn't know this was happening. Everybody's absorbed in their own stuff. But now that you have the film on your Twitter feed, on your Facebook feed, on your Instagram, now you know. Now you know. So you can't, Bernie Sanders knows. And that's why you call him out and you say, these are your blind spots and you should fix them because they're being pointed out to you. So instead of being defensive when somebody is pointing those things out, you should always be able to listen and understand that those blind spots exist with everyone. Everybody has some things that they need to think about a little bit differently, but that's why we're evolving humans. And that's that's the excitement of life. Well, maybe not in pandemic. There's not really that much that's exciting in pandemic, but so one of the things I utilized in the writing of the book is, as a member of the media, I have a very unique vantage point. So after that Politicon panel, and as I was, trying to figure out how I was going to break it out, how I was going to break out the chapters, how was I going to approach this issue, I essentially decided that I wanted to look forward and I wanted to talk to everyone. And if you read the book, it's not like big fancy words. It's not like academic. I am literally, it reads how I'm speaking right now. So literally I wanted to make it simple for people. I wanted people to understand that, America is changing currently and in the near future. And those demographic shifts will require us to have a better understanding of all of these issues. So Bernie Sanders was really just like an opportunity to be like, hey, this is an example of a place where blind spots exist and how they can be improved upon. And to credit Bernie Sanders and his campaign, he was much better on those issues in the 2020 run than in 2016, much better. And he was excellent in terms of outreach and using grassroots movement builders to reach out to the Latinx vote, to translate materials into all the different dialects that are necessary, because it is not just translating into Spanish and then sending out the same message. It is it takes work. And so to credit the Bernie Sanders campaign, he was much better in 2020 than in 2016 on those criticisms that I had pointed out. So I think, what we learned from this is that as we're 3 days from an election, and we're like anxious, as I started out, we also have to continue using, the education that we have, the women's studies classes that we've taken, the books that we have read, the memes that we've created or shared. We need to all sort of use our platforms and our voices to call out those blind spots that you see in others, to ensure that they are aware of them, or even, trying to look for them, because that's another piece of it too. Some people just sort of move throughout the world and they're not even looking for those places where they can have a better understanding of an issue. That's something I try to do all the time. Oh, wait, maybe I don't get that. Oh, yeah, I totally screwed that up. Okay, thank you for letting me know. And now I can do better on that issue. So one of the things I think that that brings me to in terms of where we are right now, obviously, in the book, I did not talk about COVID-19 because I wrote it all before COVID-19. But one of the things that you'll see in the book is that I'm obviously tied very close to the primary process. So my analysis is all about the fact that, even as a progressive movement, we have failed to acknowledge and recognize our blind spots, and there needs to be a reckoning around that now. So maybe we did the work writ large a bit, and now we have to get to a place where we can actually look inside ourselves and say, well, what blind spots do we have? We may not be blatantly sexist like Donald Trump, but what we're doing is not actually leading to a better result, right? Because we still haven't elected a woman president. Again, going back to the question I started. So for me, I think it's a matter of utilizing every platform you have, utilizing every tool that you have, ensuring that you're continuing to have conversations with your friends, with your family members, even the Trump supporting family members, so that they can at least think differently about these issues. Because I truly believe, and that is one of the themes in the book, is that Generation Z, you guys are going to change the world, right? Millennials, we're going to help. We're going to help you, we're going to try. But it's really you guys. It's really you guys that are going to change. And the combination of you and us, we are the largest voting bloc in the electorate combined. And so, that has power in it, if there's more of us. So top lines for me in this moment is that it's very important to utilize all the tools that you have. If you are, like I said, a graphic designer, you're going to utilize that tool, right? And you're going to apply it to a problem that you may identify. So maybe that's working on a campaign. Maybe that's creating content to educate people about their blind spots, right? And maybe that's something that's creating, the copy that goes under that post, right? Maybe you're a writer. So I think of it like this. I think of the need for a reckoning around these issues sort of led to a place where we needed a reckoning around these issues within our own movement. And within our own movement, it's a lot easier to have these conversations because it's kind of like, we do have conversations about race. We do have conversations about gender. That's why we're here at this conference today. So how are you going to utilize the things and the tools that you have learned through the course of your education, and then apply that to engagement outside? And that is like basically my life's work, is like taking the tools that I have and trying to apply it to change the world around me to become something different, something new, something, more equitable. Because for me, I just felt like as a little girl, thinking about how we treat people and how important that is. For me, that's the through line and driving force. So one last thing I wanted to sort of do here, now that I asked the question, what's it going to take to get a woman president? I'm going to give you part of the answer. Part of the answer is that we actually have to utilize the demographics that are in our favor as a political party. The reason why we're about to elect a woman on Tuesday, potentially as vice president, is because Joe Biden recognized what the party is becoming, the Democratic Party. And he recognized where the country is headed. And he has said he wanted to be a transitional figure to that future. And so one of the things I think a lot about is the fact that how can we, both push and acknowledge the significant progress that is being made in this moment. By selecting Kamala Harris to be on the ticket, that's a significant sign of progress. We're so close. And how do we utilize that progress and having that person whose lived experiences are going to inform better policy making, not just for people that look like Kamala and me, but people that look like everyone else, because that's a perspective that has literally never been in there in that position before. And so I think that, this moment is a very interesting one, and I'm very hopeful, that the folks that are listening to my talk today might be inspired, to, if you haven't already, not just to vote, that's the bare minimum, but to actually, look at politics like it is a job and a career, because it is. It's a pretty actually stable job. Obviously it doesn't seem that way because campaigns end, but there's always another one. And so if you were worried about job security, I always say, like, oh, I work in politics, I'm good. If we have a democracy, that is, right? The other caveat, that's why people are anxious. So I want to start talking about the future by talking about two facts about the Democratic Party that you may not know. So Democrats actually have not won a majority of the white vote since 1964. That's my favorite fact. You know why that's my favorite fact? Because most people don't know it. And they're like, we need to go to that diner in Ohio for the 10th time and talk to the guy because he's really going to make or break the election for us. And I always say, no, he's not. It's not the guy in the diner. It's probably the guy that you walked past to get in the diner that you thought probably wouldn't vote. But now he's a part of a demographic shift that makes him a part of the majority of voters. So fun fact number 2, this period that we're living through is not the first time America has snapped back from progress, right? You know that, because what happened after the Civil War? What happened after Reconstruction? What happened after that was called redemption. And so we have lived through these moments where we have made significant progress and we have snapped back. So we're like in that period where we need to make sure that we're all doing the things that we can with our own skill set and tools to push everything forward in a more progressive direction. I also wanted to read a little bit from this section of my book that essentially talks about what identity politics are. So identity politics essentially, well, my favorite definition, actually, an easier definition, not the academic one, is the Stacey Abrams definition of identity politics, which is just like, I see you and your concerns are valid and your experience is valid. And one of the things I always think about when people criticize identity politics is that you're so used to being the only one we're talking about. That's why. I get it. When we change the subject and, try to include, not in terms of diversity for the pretty picture's sake, but actually include the interests and perspectives of other types of people, why is there always pushback on that? But when it was only one kind of person, you were cool with that. That's just not even going to end up with the best result at all. So it feels to me like we have some work to do. So here's just one quick excerpt. I know people are going to read the book, but just to give you a small taste of my main thesis, because for me, I think I'm always forward thinking. I look and reflect back on history, but I think I can't change the past. So it's just a lot easier to focus and think about the future. So this is from page 29, and it's from the chapter titled Demonize Politics, because that's what they've done to identity politics, is basically demonize it. So the fact that Republicans understand that the demographics are shifting is one of the reasons why they are trying so hard to suppress the vote. They are trying to cheat. because they know they do not have more people on their side. If you had more, if you could just have the best argument, you could persuade more people, then you do that. But the reason why they're doing all of these machinations, as I call them, is because they don't have the numbers on their side. Okay, so Republicans have touted identity politics. I'm sorry, it's page 28. I'm looking down. Republicans have touted identity politics as evidence that Democrats are both out of touch with real Americans. That Democrats are out of touch with real Americans, but that's not true. It's not a coincidence that people who dismiss identity politics as a damaging framework for analysis happen to be beneficiaries of the status quo, red, heterosexual white men. So let's think about identity politics this way. It's the framework that allows everyone to participate in a functioning democracy on a playing field. We need to nominate candidates who have internalized the message that people of color will determine election outcomes and should be invested in immediately. And that once we do, we shouldn't look back as a party. The fact that Republicans get this is giving them a head start. They understand that the demographics are shifting. That's why they are putting all these conservative judges in the courts. That's why they put Amy Coney Barrett on the court, because if you can't pass progressive healthcare legislation, like say we get Medicare for all, by some miracle, it's like Medicare for all, challenged up to the Supreme Court. They understand the system and how the levers of power work. We need to understand that too. But we need to utilize the numbers that we have in order to do that. Back to the book. The fact that Republicans get this is giving them a head start. They aren't implementing laws that suppress the votes of communities of color for no reason. They're implementing voter ID laws that make it harder to vote because white voters are going to be a minority of voters. They are suppressing the votes of voters who are less likely to vote for Republicans now or in the future, because they know that in general, when voting turnout is high, Democrats win. They don't gerrymander districts for the hell of it. Gerrymandering and voter suppression don't cause our divisions. They are the result of our divisions. Republicans know demographic shifts are against them, and while demographics aren't destiny, they definitely give the Democratic Party a built-in advantage. We need an all-inclusive identity politics because the old system isn't going to be sustainable. I feel like we feel that way in pandemic. I did not write this in pandemic. This is all before pandemic. So just to be clear, isn't going to be sustainable with our new emerging majority. Knowing where the population is headed in 20 years' time, Democrats should build a movement around the majority of citizens fighting for equality for everyone. Both statistically and morally speaking, this movement is the right choice for advancing our country's politics and framework of laws into the future. We must create a more expansive vision for our politics that goes well beyond the limited agenda we've seen in the past. The conventional wisdom is that identity politics puts too much focus on race, gender, and other labels. People may think that identity politics is just Black people voting for Black candidates, or a woman candidate because you also are a woman. That's not the only reason, but it is a reason. Equitable representation does matter. To build a future, progressives should coalesce around differing identities and see where opportunities exist to use that to inform our policymaking and platform. It's all about creating a movement that acknowledges the need for specific policy goals while moving everything toward a more equitable future. The days of only having old white men represent a diverse population that includes mostly women is soon to be a relic of the past. And let's face it, the progressive movement is already a coalition of intersecting interests. So I started this talk by asking a question. What's it going to take to elect a woman president in America? Well, it's going to take an intersectional movement that acknowledges difference, that acknowledges blind spots, that recognizes their privileges, that calls them out, but also, I do like the phrase calling in a little bit better, sort of like bringing people in, trying to educate them and get them to understand. Not everybody can, hear that kind of feedback, but it is important for those of you who are on this talk you obviously understand something in a way that many of our fellow Americans don't, or maybe people in your own family don't. And so in order to get a woman elected, which we may do on Tuesday, and then everybody can go back to this talk and be like, wow, we did. What are we going to do next? But in order to actually get there, you know, we have to acknowledge the blind spots and the shortcomings and the things that we could be doing differently. And one of the things I think we need to be doing differently is embracing identity-based politics, and understanding that identity matters in politics. And I think that, you know, if we had done that sooner, we may have elected a woman sooner. But it is pretty exciting to see that we are now on the cusp of perhaps having an opportunity to do that in just a couple of days' time. So I'm going to stop there, only because I think it's like 55, and there's like so many messages in the chat that I don't know if that means there's a lot of questions or what. But I want to be able to answer questions, because I know it's an election coming up, and if you have any questions about that, I would be happy to engage those thoughts as well. But just to sort of finish out my thought here, you know, we will eventually get to a place, if we have a working and functional democracy, where we have equitable representation. And we're going to look back at the time before we had women in charge, and we're going to be like, why did it take so long? But, you know, it's very cool to think about being the generation of feminists who are going to be here to see it. And I don't know if it's going to happen on Tuesday, but wouldn't it be pretty cool if it did? And then we could all, you know, maybe put another image on our vision board for the progress we would like to see. But I think that, you know, when I started giving talks just about rape culture, I didn't imagine this much progress on that issue specifically in such a short amount of time. And I think that, you know, the work of so many amazing feminists and activists and grassroots leaders, whether they be in the Black Lives Matter movement, or whether they be in the feminist and women's movement, LGBTQ movement, just freedom movement, let's just say that, liberation, all the liberation movements, I would say that, you know, it's cool to see that we have come this far, and yet we are so close to either losing it all or getting a little bit further. So if there's anything that you can do over the course of the next 3 days to ensure that we're going a little bit further and not backwards, I implore you to do them. Implore you. I mean, you can definitely text out the vote while you watch Netflix. I did it in 2016 while I was on the campaign, you know, just to, you know, help curb some of my anxiety. Anytime I would get really stressed, I would just try to get out the vote. So I recommend doing that this weekend. There are a lot of resources. I know When We All Vote has a good texting, text out the vote program, but go to iwillvote.com and do what you can.
Thank you so much, Zerlina. That was just fabulous. And before we get to questions, I just want to join Zerlina in urging you all to spend these last couple days phone banking, texting. There's a million opportunities out there with swing left, with supermajority, with just irregular Dems up and down the ballot. There are issues with, you know, making sure we get not just the presidency changed here, but of course, that we're able to get the Senate. So do all you can. I just join you and thank you for that. And reminding people to do that. I will be doing it once again as when I go home today.
Yeah.
Do phone banking every night.
Well, it helps to diffuse the stress.
Yeah.
Channel
and you can now drink wine at the same time instead of canvassing. So it's a win-win.
Amazing. Yes, exactly.
So I first want to say to everyone, put your questions in the Q&A, and I'm going to get to them in a minute. Of course, I'm going to take my moderator's privilege and start with a question to you.
Yes.
It's sort of broad question. So we don't know what the election results are going to be, but it does appear that we're headed for record turnout. That seems to be the case. So I guess part of my question is that surely much of this record turnout is that we've seen 4 years of Trump and we are in the midst of a pandemic that he's mishandling. But we also did know who this man was 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. And everyone seems to be on the Biden bandwagon celebrities and politicians and Republicans. There's the Lincoln Project and all of that, in a way, of course, that we didn't see for Hillary. So another way of asking this, and you might detect the bitterness in my voice here, because I also worked for Hillary, and full disclosure, my daughter was on the staffer in the Iowa office. Another way of asking this is, does rank violent misogyny not motivate voters? And if so, why is that?
That's a good question. Actually, it's one of the questions that Hillary talks about in her book, because she talks about how solidarity with your race, it's people are more inclined to be in solidarity with their race than their gender. That was like what the research showed. And so there's a section in her book, What Happened, about that specific question. Because why is it that white women, a majority of them actually, voted for Donald Trump despite the Access Hollywood tape, despite all of his rhetoric about women, how he talks about women, like they are not people. And so I've marinated on that question for many months. And then my co-host on my radio show, Jess McIntosh, she reminded me of something that I knew, but I didn't really like. You know how like you hear a piece of information you knew, but in the new context, you're like, oh, that makes more sense. The fact is that white women always vote for Republicans. They're the majority of them always vote for Republicans. The majority of white women voted for Mitt Romney, John McCain, George W. Bush. I mean, you just go down the list. They always vote. I mean, if you really look at the math, white men and women, the majority of them vote for Republicans, right? And so in some ways, in the end of white politics, what I'm trying to say is that's a fact. That's something that is happening. Maybe as a political party, our strategy shouldn't be to go after voters that don't vote for us. And who a majority of them don't vote for us every time. So I absolutely think that the difference between people not being willing to go along with their gender over their race or vice versa, it is something that is in line with the historical facts. So it's almost like trying to demystify why a majority of women would vote for somebody like this. It becomes an easier question when you're realizing they just vote for Republicans. They're not even concerned with which Republican it is. That's what they do. And so, at a certain point, it's like, I need them to understand that they've internalized misogyny, that they've internalized sexism, that the reason why they're looking at Hillary Clinton and being like, oh, like, why won't you smile more, is because somebody has said that to you, or they've asked you to smile while you're walking down the street. And so I think, the only reason why, every time I watch a poll or analysis, they're like, well, if you remember, compared to 2016, blah, 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 but he's way ahead from where Hillary Clinton is. Yes, he's a boy. Like, we do the boy president thing. We do that thing, like we do. He's not a boy. Right. Joe Biden is the vice president. But like, just not even just sort of personalize it in this way. Like, yes, it's going to be easier for him because in this world that we are living in, it is easier for men to seek positions of power.
Right.
Which is the problem that we are trying to fix. So it's not like, wow, wonder why. Like, no, we know the answer because we live in a world in which women seeking positions of power makes people feel uncomfortable. They're like, I don't know what it is about Hillary. I just don't like her, but I vote for Elizabeth Warren. Then Elizabeth Warren shows up. You're like, no, not her. Then Kirsten Gillibrand shows up. You're like, no. Then, Amy Klobuchar shows up, you're like, no, thank you. Another one, is there another woman here? And and they're like, no, we'll take the mayor. I'm like, no, I just feel like maybe you should have like really seriously considered maybe those senators that are on the stage first. Anyway, point is, no shade to Mayor Pete, who I very much like as a Fox News surrogate for the Biden campaign. If you've seen those clips online, yeah, it's been fantastic. But all of that long rant to answer the question is that the reason why Joe Biden is more ahead, the reason why Joe Biden is having fewer of those issues in terms of especially the attacks, landing, sticking, and staying, is because of the gender piece. And I don't know, I think we're just going to have to sort of elect the woman before like we fix the problems. It's like electing Barack Obama, but we clearly didn't solve racism.
Right.
Even though we like to say at that time, I remember when we were like, it's post-racial America. That was funny.
Oh, thank you. That's a wonderful answer. Yeah, it's like, it's the misogyny, stupid, right? I mean,
that's exactly right.
Let me go to some of the questions because they're coming in and I want to get to them. Here is one from one of my colleagues here, Moya Bailey, who says, thank you so much, Zerlina. I'm curious what you think about electing a woman, given that Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote. It seems that we did. But if it weren't for the Electoral College, we would have been in a different boat. What do you think we might do differently? Should we be in a similar position this year? Great question, Moya.
Well, one of the things that my co-host on my radio show says all the time is like, you have to account for the cheating. So you don't know how much they're sort of going to cheat by. So you sort of, Hillary won more votes, but if she won 3 million and didn't win the Electoral College, maybe Joe Biden needs to win by 10 million. Which is crazy because that's not how elections are supposed to work. But that's where we are. So it's like, is it right? No. Can we fix it before Tuesday? No. So it's like, do everything that you possibly can to ensure that you're electing people who can work to fix it. Obviously, one side does not want to fix it. They want to actively make it worse. The other side at least is open to saying, we should reform this. HR 1 is sitting there, passed in the House and not passed in the Senate. And so these election reforms and voting rights reforms and protections, we can pass as soon as we have a majority Democratic Senate. But I think like it's sort of poetry a little bit that a woman could win and not win. It's kind of, it's a little too on the nose.
Yeah.
It's a little too on the nose. Like you win and not. I remember in 2016, even people like Hillary would like be up in the polls, and so many people would say this to me when I would see them. She should be winning by more. I don't know why she's not winning by more. And I'm like, the fact that she's winning at all is a big deal. We've never elected a woman. So this idea that like, well, she's not doing it right, or Kamala's not doing it right, or she should be doing this or that. I'm always like, well, how do you know? Because you don't know what worked because we've never actually done it. So I don't understand how you can advise how she should be doing it when we can't, and as Hillary says, we can't point to the woman in the world that is doing it perfectly.
Right.
Because the rules are subjective.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And speaking of Kamala, we have a question here about Kamala, which I want to get to, from Catherine Knight Steele, who will actually be one of our panelists later today. So
amazing.
Make sure you tune in. She says, it seems to me that the lack of enthusiasm about Harris as a first woman VP has to do with the country's unwillingness to see Black women as women. Palin's candidacy was treated, that Sarah Palin's candidacy was treated as more historic. How do you see this? Very interesting, great question. How do you see this changing in the years to come? How should those on the left treat this as their work rather than an indictment of right-wing sexism?
Oh, it's a great question because it's true. It's absolutely true. And I think, it's been making me upset all week. I'm like, we're about to elect a woman and no one is talking about it. Right. And I'm like, oh, maybe it's because they don't see her that way, which is maybe where the work needs to begin. So on the left, I think, where we can begin the work is we need to be excited about the people who excite us. And we don't need to shame someone So if a progressive woman is excited about Kamala Harris, and I am excited about Kamala Harris. Now, is Kamala Harris perfect? Is Kamala Harris the most progressive? Is Kamala Harris, correct in every single policy? No, of course not. Like, no, we never ask that of the men. We never do. But the thing is that I want to be able to say I am excited about the fact that we are about to elect a woman, and I don't want people to call that identity politics, and I don't want people to criticize me because but like her criminal justice, blah blah blah. They haven't read anything past a meme, but they want to tell me about her criminal justice record. That's just not like where the conversation should be happening. It absolutely is true. That was a good question. That when Sarah Palin was nominated, it was like, oh my God, this is so historic, amazing. This might actually be the thing that gets the Republicans to victory because of the historic nature and just like how she plays to their base, the women in their base. And I think as progressives, we need to step forward and say it if others won't. So maybe that's the answer to the question, is saying, as progressive, as people in the media, maybe this will be one of the things I talk about on my show tonight, because I've been very upset about the fact that people are not being like, oh my God, this is so amazing, we're about to do history, because Black women, our womanhood is always questioned. I mean, if you think about it, even in the context of the hearing that we just sat through for Supreme Court with Amy Coney Barrett, one of the things I thought was so interesting is how they positioned her it was a very cynical framing. Basically what they did is they put out a person, let's just say is a person with 3 years of judicial experience that was appointed by Donald Trump, that does not, her resume is light. So just a person nominated to the Supreme Court, now a justice, her resume is light. But if you criticize that, you sound a little like sexist. You do sound not great. Doesn't sound great. You go straight for the resume. So what they did is they put her out as a mom, not a judge. They put her out as a nice mom who works so hard, which means that since she has a job and kids, that makes her a feminist, which is not, in fact, what that is. But they think that if you have a job and you have kids, you are a feminist hero. Whereas we are like, no, because also if she were Black, you would not be like, wow, she's so amazing because she has 7 kids, right? So when you put it that way, it's when you realize what they did. They cynically put her forward as like a nice mom that you can't criticize. And so I think that on our side, what we need to understand is what they're doing and why they're doing it, and be able to create and craft counter arguments and pushback that will pierce through that nonsense. Because it's not what feminism is. It's not like any woman doing stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that so much. The slippage between a woman and a feminist, of course,
right.
As a feminist scholar, it drives me crazy.
Right. They're like, look at this feminist icon.
She's a monster. She's an anti-feminist.
Right. Literally, her policy and her judicial rulings and all of that, harm people. They harm people,
and
harm women, harm people.
They are
exactly
anti-feminist. So yes, thank you. I'm going to continue on the identity politics. There's a bunch of questions there. This one from Colleen Fritz. Trump has castigated political correctness from day one as a way to discredit identity politics. What are the tools to counter this narrative?
Repeat that one more time, because I want to make sure that I understand the frame of that top part.
Political and castigated political correctness from day one as a way to discredit identity politics. In other words, to say political correctness and identity politics are the same thing, right?
Right.
What are the tools to counter this narrative? I think also she's asking what to reclaim, as you say, identity politics for progressivism.
I wanted to make sure I got the front part of the question right, because I was like correctness, and I didn't hear the political. So one of the things I love about this topic and question is that the right always likes to criticize political correctness as a bad thing. And I always say, are you mean? Do you like to be mean? Do you like to be a jerk? Is that like how you're trying to be? Because political correctness to me is simply an evolution on the language and the way we treat people based on those people who didn't historically have power gaining more and finally having finally not having a voice, but having the space so that we listen to them when they say, hey, cut that out, that's not cool, or this is what I would like to be addressed as, or this is how this works, or this is what this identity is. Like that political correctness is don't be a jerk. That's all it is. It's all it is. And I refuse to believe that like we're going too far by considering people's feelings. Like, no, actually, I would like to not hurt people. I generally tend to try to not do that. So part of that is like, yes, political correctness is a good thing. It is the thing that allows you to acknowledge that somebody might be different from you and that you may have a blind spot for their experience. And if you say something, that is from that position of lack of understanding, that if you are corrected, that you will not be defensive, that you will say, oh, got it, excellent, and then you will move forward differently. And so in order to combat sort of the criticism of identity politics, literally all it is acknowledging that there are other identities that are not white men. And that should not make you feel uncomfortable that we're doing that. It should make you uncomfortable that you were okay this whole time with us only primarily talking about one type of person. And I actually think, it's so funny when I talk to people, when they read my book and they start watching even the news differently, and they'll start watching, even the political analysis differently on election nights, where, they're going through, Steve is on MSNBC where I work on the board, or David Chalian, I think, is on CNN, and everybody has like their data guy. But often the topic of focus, and it's not a critique on any of the individual people doing it, like Steve or David or anything. It's simply just like the frame that we're all working under is, what do white voters with this level of education think? What do white voters without that education think? What do white voters who are married think? What do white voters who are women think? And I'm like, where are the other voters? We break down all the white voters, and then black vote. Finally, we're at a place where we're like, oh, there's more kinds of voters than just one kind of Latino voter. Latinx voters are very diverse and have differing thoughts on issues. Yeah, and we're just saying it in 2020. When Texas is flipping, we should have done it like 3 cycles ago, but we were a little late on it. So I feel like, the political correctness question is important, because for me, I push back on that hard. I don't want to be, and if somebody is telling me that it would be better if you call me this and not that, then I will do that, because I respect people. The identity politics piece is simply understanding that we have been doing identity politics the whole time. We just were doing white identity politics. Donald Trump played off of that. He won the White House playing off of that. And actually what we can do in the future is something very different, and actually evolve on that question and include identities that are not white in our conversations, in our policy making, in our positions of power and elected office. I mean, imagine if the Congress had 30 AOCs, like what different legislation could come out of Congress. If there were 25 AOCs, 30 Ayanna Presleys, a couple of Rashida Tlaibs, some Ilhan Omars, a Sharice Davids, and like a couple more of those. I mean, that would be great, right? Because then now you're bringing people in with that diversity of lived experience, not people who look different in the picture. It's people who live a different life and are treated differently because of how they look, and that informs different policy making. That informs, how you see issues so differently. And I just feel like it improves upon what outcomes we can actually reach.
Well, fabulous. Well, of course, I think we agree on everything here. Here's another question from my colleague here at Northeastern, Lori Lefkowitz. She says, you talked about the rage and frustration about lack of consequences for violence against Black America. Trump has broken many laws without consequences. The lack of consequences is heartbreaking and totally demoralizing. And she wants to know your thoughts about the failures of our systems to hold villains accountable.
I do believe in karma. So if all else fails, I do believe in karma. I do believe that. I mean, here's the thing, and this might help people sleep at night. It doesn't help me sleep. I'm not currently sleeping great. I don't know anybody who is, but it does help me feel better. Think about Donald Trump as a person. He is wealthy. He is the president. He got, everything that he thinks makes him, more powerful, more successful, more great. He has a wife, Melania, that is a very specific type, right? And I think, like, in a lot of ways, he has all this sort of pieces. And I don't mean to dehumanize Melania. I feel like he has done so in the way that he has presented her to the public. But what I'm saying is that he has all of these things that, we have been acculturated and taught that are supposed to make us happy, right? And one of the things that I realized is Donald Trump is a very unhappy person. And so he might not ever end up in a jail, but he will not go to sleep at night content and happy, because it's obvious that currently that is not what is happening. And so for me, I feel like that's, I can't myself hold Donald Trump accountable. I can be a part of the systems that, work to elect different people that can hold him accountable. But if all the systems fail, I mean, our democracy has a bigger problem than maybe, like, personally how I feel about the need for accountability. Like, if there is no system to hold him accountable, then we have to have a serious conversation about the future of democracy and the rule of law. But to the piece about how personally it makes me feel that he's not held accountable, I believe that eventually the fact that he's treated women this way, the fact that he's talked to women about women this way, the fact that he's caged children on the border and ripped them away from their parents, all of those things, there is a compound effect and impact on whether or not he can hold on to power. And they may not count all the ballots, and maybe he'll be able to become a dictator. We don't know, right? Because if they don't count the ballots, it's effectively what we're living in. But I do believe that the women that you saw at the Women's March, the women that you see organizing their book clubs to canvass, the women that you see involved in politics that you've never seen before, the women that are holding the households together because we're all in the house with kids and we have to teach and work and be a wife. And, I don't have to do parenting or wifing. So I have a lot less, or partnering, but I have a lot less to do. But I think that, the power of women in this moment is, like, it's in our hands, literally. We were devastated after 2016. But one of the thoughts I had immediately after the election in 2016, I swear it was when it was happening, like, I was sitting in the Javits Center and I had this thought, a voice in my head said, do we think we were gonna, like, nominate a woman and on the first try we were gonna get a woman president? I don't know, maybe that was, like, a little naive, right? I felt naive. We did it with Obama, so it was like, oh, we could do it. But then we forgot he's a guy, and it's different, and then it may be more difficult, or different, and in ways that we didn't imagine, right? Because of the media infrastructure and whatnot. So, I look at it like this: like, we better get there, but certainly the misogyny and all of that is operating at all times.
I'd like to get back to that question, because you raised earlier this point about our sort of inability, put it this way, our inability to celebrate our feminist heroes in this way.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's certainly true around Hillary, that, the idea to just be absolutely thrilled out of your mind that this was happening was really, if you were a leftist, was really condemned, And
Right.
I think there's the same process going on with a nice racist overtone that's going on with Kamala now. So I guess I want to ask the question, what can we as feminists do What are ways to sort of claim our feminist joy
Yeah.
and celebrate our feminist joy in feminists running for office and feminists being feminists?
I think, I mean, obviously social media allows us to amplify so much more. So like actually having the joy and then posting that, I mean, that's the first step. It's like showing the joy. Because I remember Rachel Sklar, one of my friends, she started The List, which is a network of, professional women. And she always used to say this in 2016, and I still use it to this day. So people would say, I don't know what it is about her. Like, I just don't like her, And so she would miss a beat. She would say, well, I do, and here's why, and list out her reasons, right? Don't even accept the premise that you shouldn't be excited for whatever reason, that you can't be excited for whatever reason. The reason why they're telling you can't be excited and that it's not really that big a deal is literally a part of the whole reason why it hasn't happened.
Right.
They're trying to make it, because, I always think a lot about Hillary's little it's not an anecdote, but the story in her book about the fish swimming through the water, and one fish says to the other fish, like, hey boys, how's the water today? And then the fish is like, what's water? And like that, the water is sexism is the thing we don't, and I just think about the fact that like we don't see it, we act like we fixed it already, but yet men are in charge of everything, right? And I always walk in the room and I'm like, why am I the only woman here? Why am I the only Black person here? I'm that annoying person. But like, we can all become that annoying person, and sort of demand, especially as you rise up higher, and sort of demand that, at least awareness of the lack of diversity. Right. But I think like, no, we need to be excited about Kamala. Don't let anybody tell you that you can't be excited about Kamala Harris. I mean, and I hate even that I have to be like, well, she's not perfect, but I really like her. Like, we do this thing where we caveat our excitement. Kamala Harris is amazing, and she will be an amazing vice president if enough people show up to elect her, right? And Joe Biden as the president. He said he wants to be a transitional figure in the country. And so I think, one of the things that's so cool to see is, him actually acting like he really means that. That's super cool. And he seems to be evolving on issues and trying to, at least, he's definitely been listening, because I remember the debate when he was asked about Black people and he started talking about record players. And so at the last debate, when he had actually a very effective answer about Black people and the talk they have to give to their children, that means that somebody had given him some stuff and he listened, right? So look, I say, show your excitement, be excited. Don't let anybody tell you that this is not exciting because like, oh, well, her record on blah, blah, blah. No, like no one does that with men. No one does that. No one does that. You were excited about Mayor Pete, and you have no idea what he did in any policy and when he was mayor of the little town you never heard of before this last year. And so I'm not talking about anybody specifically. I'm just like, last year was so funny because people would be like, well, Mayor Pete. I was like, he's my age. I can't go to the debate and show up and be like, I'm going to tell you why policies are later. And I say that as somebody who, I was critical of him during the primary. I'm critical of him in the book, but I really very much like him. I'm not critical of anybody in this book, and it's personal or anything like that. This is all through the vein of wanting to be constructive. But I feel like his blind spot for the fact that he was being treated as more serious than he probably would have if he was a woman with the same resume, or the women that have a better resume who are actually on the stage with him, that are in the Senate, like the senators here. So, be excited, because, they get excited about, the wonderkins. You notice that like young women coming up in politics are never called that. They're not calling AOC a wonderkin, but they sure did call Paul Ryan that. So be excited.
Be excited. Listen, this is the great note to end on. Be excited.
Yes.
Vote, 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 and get everyone out to vote, and do all you can in these last few days to make sure we can wake up on Wednesday or Thursday or whatever it is, and actually feel that we might have pushed back on fascism to some extent. I mean,
well, that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing here. Yeah,
that's what
exactly.
we're doing. I want to thank Zerlina so much. It's just been fabulous. I want to tell everyone here to remember to register if you haven't already to the other events going on today. We have a panel at 1 and another panel at 3. So please make sure you join those. We got fabulous lineup. And again, thank you all for coming to this event. And please, let's hope for some good news soon. Zerlina, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And everybody stay safe, wear your mask.
Thank you.
Thank you.